He was a young king with everything to prove a ruler who faced the impossible. Henry V was not only the King of England, he was a leader in the midst of a century-long war against France. In 1415, with his army outnumbered, he led them to one of the most improbable victories in history, Battle of Agincourt. How did this determined king transform from a youthful prince into a military genius who defied the odds, changing the course of the 100 Years' War? What drove him to risk everything for a throne that seemed almost out of reach? Join us as we uncover the story of Henry V, the king who defied fate and led England to glory. Henry V was born on the 16th of September, 1386, the eldest son of Henry IV of England. His early years were overshadowed by the political instability that defined his father's reign. When Henry IV deposed Richard II in 1399 to claim the throne, it set in motion a period of division within England. The young Henry V, at the time still Prince Henry, was thrust into this tense environment, his early life marked by the complex political landscape of a fractured kingdom. Raised in the midst of uncertainty, young Henry's early years were far from idyllic. While his father's rule faced constant challenges from factions that questioned the legitimacy of his reign, Henry's youth was also defined by personal struggles. In his early 20s, Henry was seen as a wild and unruly prince, at odds with the constraints of royal duty. He was known for his youthful exuberance, often spending time in the company of unsavory characters. His early rebellion against authority, particularly his distant relationship with his father, became part of his legacy. Yet, as Prince Henry grew older, he began to display the traits that would later define his reign. In 1413, after the death of his father, Henry V ascended to the throne. He was just 26 years old, and faced the monumental task of consolidating his power in a kingdom divided. His reign began with immediate challenges: the instability left by his father's rule, the widespread discontent among his subjects, and looming tensions with Francois of England's oldest rivals. One of the greatest tensions Henry inherited was the long-standing conflict with France. The 100 Years' War had raged on since 1337, with both nations vying for control over territories and royal succession. For decades, the war had been a game of shifts and stalemates, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. Yet, by the time Henry V became king, France was at its most vulnerable, plagued by internal divisions and a disputed royal succession. The Dauphin, Charles VII, was at odds with the Burgundians, and the French court was embroiled in turmoil. For Henry, this chaos presented both a challenge and an opportunity. Henry V, though young, was not content to sit idly by. His ambitions were clear: to strengthen England and reclaim English territories in France that had been lost during the reigns of his predecessors. His claim to the French throne was based on his descent through his great-grandfather, King Edward III, who had been one of the major claimants to the French crown during the early years of the 100 Years' War. Henry's motivation was not just about royal inheritance, but the potential to solidify England's power by defeating France once and for all. Despite facing a number of domestic issues, his kingdom, still fragile from the legacy of Richard II's deposition and his father's contested reign, Henry was determined to take action. His first major military campaign as king was aimed directly at France. Henry would lead an English army into France, and his primary goal was to assert his claim to the throne with the added aim of gaining territorial concessions from the French. In 1415, Henry gathered an army and set sail for France. What followed would change the course of history. However, the road to war was not easy. The odds were stacked against Henry and his army. France, despite its internal divisions, was far stronger than the English forces. The English, outnumbered and under-equipped, faced the seemingly insurmountable task of invading a much larger, more powerful nation. What strategy would Henry employ to defeat the mighty French? And how would he lead his men through the seemingly impossible? Henry V's first decisive military action came in 1415, when he landed in France with an army of around 12,000 men. The French forces, by contrast, were estimated to be around 30,000 strong. Despite this enormous disadvantage, Henry was determined to press on with his campaign. His first goal was to lay siege to the port of Harfleur, a strategic city that would serve as a vital base for further operations. The siege was grueling, and the English army faced many challenges including disease, supply shortages, and the harsh conditions of war. The siege lasted several weeks, but in September 1415, Henry's forces successfully captured Harfleur. The capture of Harfleur, while a tactical victory, came at a steep price. The English army was severely weakened by disease, and many of Henry's men were suffering from illness and exhaustion. Faced with the prospect of continuing deeper into France or retreating back to England, Henry made a fateful decision. Rather than returning home, he chose to press on toward Calais, hoping to link up with English reinforcements there and make his way back to England by sea. However, as Henry and his army marched through the French countryside, they encountered growing French resistance. The French, under the command of Charles d'Albret, the Constable of France, gathered their forces and sought to intercept the English army before it could reach Calais. The English army, though victorious at Harfleur, was now stretched thin and vulnerable. The situation seemed dire for Henry and his forces, but Henry, ever the strategist, made a bold decision that would lead to one of the most famous battles in history. In October 1415, the two armies met near the village of Agincourt. The French, confident in their overwhelming numbers, had positioned themselves on higher ground, with a clear view of the battlefield. The terrain, however, was muddy and swampy due to recent rains, which would play a crucial role in the outcome of the battle. Henry, knowing that his forces were outnumbered, carefully positioned his army to take advantage of the terrain. The English army was positioned in a narrow stretch of land, with a line of archers flanking the front and the flanks of the army protected by woodland. Henry's strategy for the Battle of Agincourt was simple yet brilliant. He knew that the key to victory lay in the use of his longbowmen, who had proven themselves invaluable throughout the campaign. The English longbowmen were armed with bows capable of shooting arrows at a range far greater than the French crossbowmen or knights could respond to. Henry ordered his archers to form a wall of arrows, while his infantrymen created a solid line of defense. The French, eager to attack, made a critical mistake. They charged, full of confidence, across the muddy field, heading straight for the English position. But the muddy ground and the rain-soaked terrain were not on the French side. The heavy cavalry, bogged down in the mud, was rendered virtually ineffective. As the French charged forward, their ranks became disorganized and vulnerable to the devastating barrage of English arrows. What followed next would be one of the most one-sided victories in military history. Could Henry's tactical genius turn the tide of war in his favor, or would the French forces overpower the young English king? In the heat of battle, Henry's longbowmen unleashed a deadly volley of arrows, thinning the French ranks and wreaking havoc on their cavalry. The French knights, weighed down by their armor and slowed by the mud, were unable to break through the English lines. The English archers positioned on the flanks continued to fire relentlessly, forcing the French army to fight on uneven ground with limited mobility. As the French advanced, their own disorganization became their undoing. Unable to break the English line, the French army was forced into a retreat, but it was too late. The French suffered heavy losses, including many of their noblemen and high-ranking officers. Henry, demonstrating remarkable leadership on the battlefield, kept his forces organized and continued to press the attack. The English army, though vastly outnumbered, fought with incredible discipline, and by the end of the battle, the French had been decisively defeated. The Battle of Agincourt was an extraordinary victory for Henry V, but it came at a significant cost. Thousands of French soldiers were killed, while the English lost only a fraction of their forces. The battle became a symbol of Henry's military genius and a testament to the effectiveness of the English longbowmen. Agincourt was not just a military victory. It was a turning point in the 100 Years' War. Henry V's victory on the battlefield gave him the momentum he needed to press forward with his claim to the French throne. It proved that a smaller, well-organized force could defeat a much larger army if led with skill and precision. Agincourt cemented Henry's reputation as one of England's greatest military commanders and demonstrated the power of strategy over sheer numbers. With his victory at Agincourt, Henry V had achieved the unthinkable, but while the battle secured his place in history, it did not guarantee his success in the larger struggle for the French throne. Would Henry's victory at Agincourt propel him to claim the French crown? Or would the long-term realities of war, politics, and diplomacy stand in his way? Following the stunning victory at Agincourt, Henry V's place in history was sealed. The English forces had triumphed against overwhelming odds, but the battle was only a part of a much larger war that had been raging for more than a century. Though Henry's victory was a turning point, the road to a final resolution of the 100 Years' War was still uncertain. Henry's victory at Agincourt gave him the upper hand, but the war was far from over. The question now was whether Henry could capitalize on his success and press forward in his bid for the French throne. After Agincourt, Henry moved quickly to solidify his position in France. The French nobility, shaken by their devastating defeat, struggled to organize a cohesive defense. With much of the French court in disarray, Henry sought to strengthen his claims through both military action and diplomacy. His success at Agincourt allowed him to negotiate with key factions within France, most notably the Burgundians, who had been at odds with the French crown. Henry's diplomatic strategy was to gain the support of powerful factions and use his military success as leverage to secure his position in France. By 1417, Henry had gathered enough support from the Burgundians to launch a campaign in Normandy. He began his conquest by capturing key cities in northern France. The English were now in a strong position, with their army able to secure territory and even lay siege to French strongholds. The conquest of Normandy was swift and decisive. Henry's army moved with precision, and by the fall of 1419, key cities such as Rouen had fallen to English control. Henry's military genius, combined with his effective use of diplomacy, had allowed him to expand English control over vast swaths of France. However, the French were not ready to surrender. In 1420, Henry's path to the throne of France became clearer when he reached the Treaty of Troyes, a diplomatic agreement between the English and the French. In this treaty, the French king, Charles VI, agreed to disinherit his own son, the Dauphin Charles, and recognize Henry as his legitimate heir to the French throne. The treaty effectively made Henry the ruler of France, but it was not without its complications. The Dauphin and his supporters rejected the treaty, leading to continued conflict in the regions not yet under English control. Despite the political challenges, Henry's position was stronger than ever. He married Catherine of Valois, the daughter of Charles VI, securing his claim to the French throne through marriage. Henry's political and military triumphs seemed to set him on the path to an unprecedented reign as both the King of England and France. But, as history would show, Henry's reign was not destined to be long. In 1422, at the age of 35, Henry V died unexpectedly. The news of his death sent shockwaves through England and France alike. Henry had left the throne of both England and France to his infant son Henry VI. Henry V's sudden death raised questions about the future of both England and France. With a young, inexperienced king now on the throne, would the fragile peace that Henry had fought so hard to secure survive? The legacy of Henry V, while cemented by his victories, would be challenged by the circumstances of his untimely death. Could the empire Henry had built endure? Or would the forces of division once again tear the two nations apart? Henry V's death marked the end of an era. The man who had led England to its greatest military triumph in the 100 Years' War was gone, and the nation was left to navigate the turbulent waters of a new political landscape. Henry VI, the young king who inherited both the English and French crowns, was still a child at the time of his father's death. This created a power vacuum that both factions within England and France would seek to fill. The instability that followed Henry's death led to the Wars of the Roses, a series of conflicts within England that would last for decades. Despite the tumultuous aftermath of his death, Henry V's legacy remained as one of England's most revered kings. His reign had transformed England's position in Europe, and his victory at Agincourt had shown the world that even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome with courage, leadership, and strategy. In France, while Henry V never had the chance to fully solidify his claim, his military successes had changed the course of the 100 Years' War. The Treaty of Troyes, though short-lived, would be remembered as one of the most significant diplomatic agreements of the period. and his marriage to Catherine of Valois would eventually lead to a dynastic connection between England and France. Henry's reputation as a warrior king only grew over time, with his achievements at Agincourt often depicted as the epitome of medieval chivalry and courage. English chroniclers hailed him as a hero, and his image as a strong, just king became a symbol of national pride. Even today, Henry V is remembered not just for his military victories, but for his leadership qualities, his ability to inspire loyalty, his military ingenuity, and his role as a unifying figure for England during a time of great turbulence. While Henry V's legacy remains firmly embedded in history, the centuries that followed would continue to revisit his reign and its impact on both England and France. As the English monarchy struggled to maintain its grip on French territories, and as the Wars of the Roses erupted in England, questions about the true impact of Henry's rule would come to the forefront. What would have happened if he had lived longer? Could his legacy have shaped the future of both England and France in even greater ways? Henry V's death in 1422 left a legacy that would continue to shape the course of both England and France for years to come. Though his reign was short-lived, his impact on the 100 Years' War was profound. With his passing, the balance of power between the two nations shifted dramatically. The Treaty of Troyes, which had declared Henry as the rightful heir to the French throne, became irrelevant. The French, still bitter about Henry's claim, rejected it and rallied behind the Dauphin Charles VII, who would eventually take the throne. While Henry V had secured crucial victories on the battlefield and made significant political advances, the aftermath of his death saw the slow unraveling of English dominance in France. His son, Henry VI, was only an infant when he ascended to the throne of both England and France, leaving a power vacuum that his regents struggled to fill. The English crown, now distracted by internal strife, would lose its grip on France over the coming decades. The war that Henry V had fought so hard to win would stretch on for nearly another 30 years before it finally concluded in 1453, with the English losing nearly all of their French territories except Calais. Despite the eventual failure of the English cause in France, Henry V's legacy remained deeply ingrained in the English national consciousness. The victory at Agincourt became one of the defining moments of English history, celebrated in literature, art, and national pride. Henry's reputation as a military genius who led his troops to victory against overwhelming odds made him a symbol of English resolve and determination. The story of Agincourt, immortalized in Shakespeare's famous play Henry V, helped solidify his image as one of the greatest warrior kings in English history. Yet, the question of what might have been if Henry V had lived longer looms large in the history of the 100 Years' War. Would he have been able to secure a lasting peace with France, solidifying English dominance? Could he have prevented the internal divisions in England that eventually led to the Wars of the Roses? These questions have lingered throughout history, with many historians wondering whether the fate of both England and France would have been different under Henry V's continued leadership. Mini cliffhanger transition. Though Henry V's death altered the course of the 100 Years' War, his legacy would continue to echo through the ages. But what about the larger significance of his reign? What did his military strategies, political decisions, and his legacy as a leader mean for future generations? Henry V's reign, despite its brevity, had lasting consequences for the history of England and France, and the way the world viewed kingship and military leadership. Voice-over script continued. Henry V's legacy extends beyond the battlefield. He was not just a warrior king, but also a symbol of English power and resilience. His rule marked a high point in English military history, and his leadership in the conquest of France inspired generations of English monarchs. However, his inability to consolidate his victories after Agincourt and his untimely death left England vulnerable to internal divisions. The power struggles between the houses of Lancaster and York, which culminated in the Wars of the Roses, were partly a consequence of the power vacuum Henry left behind. The English defeat in the 100 Years' War, which ultimately resulted in the loss of almost all of England's French territories, was compounded by the internal instability that followed Henry V's death. The English throne was contested in the coming decades, with Henry VI's weak leadership contributing to the prolonged civil conflict. Though Henry V had set the stage for England's dominance in Europe, his death plunged the country into years of internal strife. In France, Henry V's death allowed the Dauphin Charles to finally ascend to the throne as Charles VII. Under his rule, France gradually regained the territories it had lost to England, and the French crown slowly rebuilt its strength. The culmination of this recovery came in 1453 with the victory of the French army, led by Joan of Arc and other national heroes, effectively ending English hopes for a French empire. Henry V's reign, though short, also set a powerful precedent in terms of royal leadership and the role of the monarchy. He was one of the last English monarchs to successfully claim the French throne and secure significant victories abroad. His military strategies, particularly at Agincourt, were studied for generations as a model of tactical brilliance. His use of longbowmen, his ability to manage his troops' morale, and his knack for turning the tide of seemingly impossible battles marked him as a king who understood the art of warfare like few others. Yet, despite the victories and the lasting impact of his reign, Henry V's legacy remains a paradox. He was a king who rose from a tumultuous political environment to lead England to glory, but his sudden death left unresolved questions about his potential. Could he have brought a lasting peace to France? Could he have secured England's position in Europe for centuries to come? While history remembers Henry V as a hero, the true scope of his legacy is as much about what might have been as what he actually achieved. As England moved forward in the wake of Henry's death, the country faced many challenges. The rise of the Wars of the Roses and the loss of French territories left England in a period of flux. Henry's death set off a chain of events that would shape the English monarchy for generations. Yet, his reputation as a military genius and a resolute king endured. Even today, Henry V is remembered as one of England's greatest warrior kings, and his legacy continues to be celebrated in literature, history, and culture. The Battle of Agincourt remains one of the most iconic military victories in history, symbolizing the triumph of strategy and determination against overwhelming odds. Henry V's place in history is assured, not only because of his victories on the battlefield, but also because of the way he shaped the English monarchy and military tradition. Ultimately, Henry V's reign, though short, marked a turning point in both English and French history. His legacy serves as a reminder of the power of decisive leadership, the importance of military strategy, and the complex consequences of war. As we look back on his life, we are left with an enduring question. Could his reign have changed the future of Europe if he had lived longer? Or was his legacy destined to be one of unfinished potential? Henry V's story is a tale of glory, ambition, and a kingdom left in the balance. His legacy will continue to be debated by historians for generations to come, as we seek to understand the true impact of his reign on the course of history. Henry V, the warrior king whose leadership and triumphs in battle became a symbol of English power, left behind a complex and multifaceted legacy. From the strategic brilliance that led him to victory at Agincourt, to his untimely death that altered the course of both English and French history, Henry's reign has been studied, debated, and celebrated for centuries. But what is the true impact of his legacy, and how does it resonate with us today? As we reflect on Henry V's life, we're left with powerful questions. Could England have maintained its stronghold in France if Henry had lived longer? How did his personal ambition and military genius shape the course of European history? And what does his legacy tell us about leadership, both in times of war and peace? We'd love to hear your thoughts on Henry V's legacy. Was he a hero whose influence transcended his short reign, or a king whose potential was cut short before he could fully fulfill it? What do you think Henry V's reign means for both English and French history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you find this documentary insightful? Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who are interested in the fascinating history of the 100 Years' War and the kings who shaped its outcome. Stay tuned for more in-depth stories on history's most impactful figures and events. In our next episode, we'll explore the life of Joan of Arc, the young French heroine, who rose from obscurity to lead the French army in its struggle against England. Was she a divine messenger, or simply a brilliant military strategist? Join us as we unravel the story of Joan of Arc and her pivotal role in the final chapters of the 100 Years' War. Like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay updated on our latest episodes.